Welcome to a TUSD robotics production. In this lesson, you will learn how to continue building the RISE robot in OnShape, steps 11 through 19, kind of, without the brain, and we're going to skip a couple steps. Here we go. All right, welcome back to lesson 3 of building the RISE robot. We left off in step 11 where we added these 3 pitch shafts into our beam, and we're recreating a left side of the chassis to match the right side of the chassis. And so now we're going to actually add 2 corner connectors like you can see here on the right side. So we need to insert actually 2 corner connectors, one for step 11 and one for step 12. So I'm going to go to my insert menu using the icon, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look for my 2x2 corner connector, which is also 2 by wide, and here we go. And you'll notice that when it's placed right on top of the other beam that's fixed. And this makes it really hard to move it off. And I've actually struggled with this. So I'm actually going to close this out. I'm not going to accept this insert. I'm going to close it out to get rid of it. And I need to go back and I need to take that fix off of that first beam. You can see the icon right here. We fixed this beam in place so that we could always go back to that isometric view. But I'm going to take it off for a minute. And I'm going to go to unfix, and I'm going to move this whole beam that we fixed. I'm going to move it a little bit to the right so that that dot is exposed, because when we insert parts on an iPad, it inserts it right on that center dot. So I'm going to actually fix this beam now just a little bit to the right of the dot so that we can use the isometric view. But now watch what happens when I insert the part. I'm going to go to insert. I'm going to find my 5 hole corner connector, my 2 by wide, and when I tap it, look, it puts it right where that dot is, which is perfectly fine. So I'm going to check mark to accept, and then I'm going to put this this is step 11. I'm going to put this first corner connector to match this one right here. You'll notice that it is not all the way, let me zoom in a little bit, that it's not all the way at the end, that it's the second hole in. That is where we're going to fasten this. So let me go back to my isometric view, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. We're going to use the bottom ring of the peg, remember, not the top, so that it sits flush with the beam. So let me go to my fastener mate, and let me go ahead and select that bottom part of the peg, or that ring right there. And it looks like it didn't select it, so I'm going to tap that dot in the middle. Now it says one entity selected. Let me zoom out a little bit and go to this beam. I can't see the back side, so I'm actually going to use my 3D cube, and I'm going to go to the back. And I'm going to select the second to last hole. Try and get the top one right there. And it doesn't look like it's selected, so I tap the white dot. It looks pretty good. I just need to rotate it using my different icons at the bottom of my properties window. So that's 1 rotation, 2 rotations. There we go. The 3rd rotation looks perfect. So check mark to accept. All right, let's go back to the isometric view to see what we have. All right, this looks really good. You'll notice that the overhang on this right side is going one way, and then on this left one it's going the other way. Doesn't really matter. In a real robot build, you would probably just flip it around, but it's fine for CAD. Okay, we're going to now insert for step 12 our second corner connector. So I go back to my insert menu. I'm looking for another 2x2 corner connector with the 5 holes in the center. There we go. Notice it comes in right on that dot, so good thing we moved that fixed beam. I'm going to check mark to accept. Okay, now this one, if you look at step 12 and you count in, you will notice that it's going to go in 9 holes, or 8 and 9 holes will be used to connect this hole and this hole right there. We have an 8 and a 9. So let me go ahead and use my fastener mate. And let me zoom in a little bit here, and we want the top hole of this one right there. Let's do the top hole. I think that's good. Looks like it didn't select it, so I'm going to tap that white dot to make sure the entity is selected. Then I'm going to turn this around to the back again. I'm actually going to call that hole 9 because I want that corner connector to flip over. So if I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm going to use this hole right here. I'm going to use the top one right there. I think that did it. It's going to surround that pitch shaft or that axle, this corner connector will. So when I hit that, it looks pretty good. Let me check mark to accept and see what it looks like. Go back to the isometric view. All right, it just needs to be offset a little bit. So actually it needs to be flipped and offset. So let's go ahead and open that because it actually went to hole 9 and 10 instead of 8 and 9. So let me go ahead and edit that fastener mate and rotate. That worked. Okay, so make sure you're covering the holes around that axis or that pitch shaft there. But now I'm going to need to offset. So I'm going to offset this. And you might have a different way of going about this, especially if you picked a different hole for your fastener mate. But I'm going to do mine. Let's see. Let me see what negative 0.2 or what does 0.2 do? I need to go a little more than that. It's going in the right direction though. Let's try 0.5. And I think that's good. Let me check mark to accept. Let me rotate. Oh, it's a little too far. And it's fine that that overhang is going over the beam. Let's go ahead and open that back up and let's go to, we did 0.5. I think I want to do 0.4. All right, that looks really good. It's probably just a little bit, nope, that looks really good. Okay, so back to my isometric view. Notice now that we have corner connectors that are exactly opposite of the other side. Okay, so it's time to add the smart motor. So I'm going to go to my insert menu. For some reason, my document got stuck on the insert menu. So I just went back to my main OnShape account. Now I'm going to come back in and the insert menu has gone away. Okay, let's do this again. It's time to insert the smart motor. So I'm going to use the insert icon and it's going to list all the parts here. I'm going to scroll down to find smart motor. All right, let's see, it doesn't want to go in. For some reason, the smart motor is acting weird. I'm going to do this second smart motor right there. That one seems to work, not the first one. Okay, so I've got my smart motor in, and I'm going to hit check mark to accept. And notice that the smart motor, I want these holes on the back of the smart motor to be fastened to these holes here. Now remember that this axle or pitch shaft is what goes in the center of this motor in that square hole. So we can do any one of these 4 holes around the pitch shaft or around this axle right here. So I'm going to use a fastener mate. And I'm going to use the top hole above the pitch shaft right there. Doesn't look like it's selected, so let me tap the dot to select it. And then let me rotate. Well, let me go back to the isometric. That doesn't work. Let me go to back. Oh, it's right where I need it to be. How about... So I'm having a hard time getting it. So I'm going to close out this fastener mate. I'm going to move the motor. Let me go back to the isometric view. And let me go ahead and just move this motor down a little bit. So when I go to the back side, I can see it. All right, let's try this again. Double tap to deselect my part. I'm going to go to my fastener mate. I'm going to turn this around to the back side. All right, so I'm going to use this hole that is right, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. This hole that's right above where the axle is going to be inserted. Oh, come on, there we go, right there. Will that do it? Looks like it, I hope. And then I'm going to use this hole, and it's going to flip over. So I'm actually going to use the bottom hole on this side. Let's see what that does. Oh, didn't select it, so let's tap the button. I definitely need to switch the axis. Okay, that looks good. All right, I think that's good. Let me go ahead and check mark to accept and go back to my isometric view. And it looks pretty good. I think we're good there. The motors look a little bit different because the way that those corner connectors are attached, we've got the overhang going one way on one and one way on the other. We'd easily fix this on a robot. For now, I think we're going to call that good. Okay, to our isometric view. So next we are going to add a 2x10 beam to the back of the chassis. So I'm going to jump to step 15, and if you look at the directions, you can see that there's a 2x10 beam that connects the back side of both of these sides of the chassis. So we're going to go to the insert menu, and I'm going to insert a 2x10 beam into the workspace, check mark to accept. And let me zoom in a little bit. You're going to see that these holes, let me move this over, kind of get it in the right position. It's going to come back here. These holes right back here are going to connect to these holes right back here. Now on a real robot, I would connect all 4 with pins, but because we're doing CAD, we're just going to connect 1. So double tap to deselect my part I just selected. I'm going to tap the fastener mate, and let me move this over a little bit. First hole, I'm gonna pick the bottom right corner, that top hole right there on the beam. If it doesn't select it, I'm just going to tap that white dot, and you can see one entity selected. And I'm going to come over here, and I'm also going to do that to this hole. Let's try and get the top of that hole. There we go, right there. Let me tap it to select it, and looks pretty good. But I need to, let me try and, if I rotate, what happens? What if I do flip the axis? Okay, that looks good right there. So check mark to accept, and we have our first beam attached. It looks like it could be offset a little bit. It's overlapping a little bit, but I'm going to let it be for now. Let's add the other one and see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to now take this hole on the other side, and I'm going to connect it to this one right here. So I think that's probably a good view to start with. So I'm actually going to try and do it from this angle. So I'm going to do a fastener mate. And I'm going to try and I want to do this bottom left hole, but I would actually like, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I actually would like the bottom of that hole. So let's see. Oh, it already selected one. Let me close out that fastener mate and do that again. Remember, if you make a mistake, you just go backwards and delete it and do it again. All right, so fastener mate. I'm going to use my selection tool. I actually want the bottom hole, if I can do that correctly. I think that's it right there. There's my first entity selected, and now I'm going to try and get this. I'm going to do the top of this hole right there. And let's see what happens. It looks like it moved. It's actually fastened, so when I hit check mark, it will all go with it. So let me go back to my isometric view and see what it looks like. And that looks really good. Now, I got to say, there are some imperfections I can see. There's a little bit of overlap with my motor right here on this beam. That could be pulled out a little bit. There's also a little overlap with this corner connector on this 2x10 on both sides. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not going for perfection. I'm just trying to teach you how to use CAD for the first time for most of you. So this looks pretty good to me. All right, we are now going to take a step back because we forgot to put this 1x4 on this side right here. So this is actually a step back to step 13, but we need to add a 1x4 into this workspace. So I'm going to go to my insert menu. I'm looking for a 1x4 beam. There it is right there, just past it. Okay, and we're check mark to accept, and we're going to use one of these center holes on above or below that center hole to connect it to one of these end holes right here. And it's probably best to do this on the inside if possible. I'm actually going to try to move this part a little bit to make it easier to do the attachment. So if they're facing the same way, it's kind of easier to get the fasteners on the holes. Okay, so double tap to deselect that part. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. That should do it right there. That's going to be easy to constrain because they're both facing my way. All right, so I'm going to go to a fastener mate and then use my selection tool, and I'm going to use I'm going to use this hole right here. Now, ideally, I would use the bottom of those 3 holes, but I'm just going to use the top because I can always flip the axis. So let's go ahead and select that one, and then I'm going to select this one right here. Let's see what that does. All right, I'm going to go ahead and rotate and see. There we go, right there. I think that's good. Let me check mark to accept and see. Let's go to my isometric view. Let's see if we need to do any offsetting. Oh, we do need to do some offsetting. It's blended way too much. That is definitely not going to pass on this one. So let's go ahead and open up that fastener mate that we just did. And I'm going to, yours may already look fine because remember, we're probably picking a little bit of different points. But I'm going to offset this one by, I think it's on the Z. Let's see what 0.5 does. Way too much. Let's try 0.25. I think that looks pretty good. Let's check mark to accept. And, oh, it's a little too much. Let me open that back up. And let's do 0.15. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm gonna call it a day on that one. That looks good. And my isometric view. Okay, so we are now done. We have two sides of the chassis that are connected to the fixed beam we originally started with. So we are getting very close to finishing this chassis. Now, if you've gotten this far, congratulations. This is a very long process, so you should be very proud of your work so far. Now, we are going to jump to step 18 next. And in step 18, we're going to add another 2x10 beam. But you can see in step 18 that this 2x10 beam is used to connect across the chassis to hold the brain on. And we're actually not going to do that because the brain is a very large file and can slow down your OnShape a little bit. But we can call this chassis finished even without the brain. So we're going to add a 2x10 beam and we're going to connect it from this corner connector or side connector to this one. Now currently we have what's called a U-shaped chassis, and you can see that it has a U shape. And then we're going to add this 2x10 beam and have it go across the chassis and turn it into an A-shaped chassis. So let's go to the insert menu and I'm going to add another 2x10 beam into the workspace. I'm going to go ahead and move it. Oh, check mark to accept. I'm going to go ahead and move it a little bit so it's a little bit more in the position that I'm wanting to do. Makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so double tap to deselect that part. I want to take one of these two holes, one or two, and connect it to one of these two pins. So let's go ahead and get a fastener mate. And I'm going to choose this pin right here first. Let's see if that does it. And then I'm going to use my selection tool and try this corner right here. I should probably zoom in. I'm having a hard time seeing if I'm connecting the right place, but it looks like I have. Check mark to accept. No, it doesn't look very good. It's not even. So I actually need to zoom. I'm going to undo this and get rid of that fastener mate. I need to do this a little bit more precisely. So maybe this angle will help right here. I can see what level of point I'm choosing. Okay, so let's go back to the fastener mate. And I'm going to use my selection tool. I want the top of this pin right there. Is that going to do it? I'm going to try and do, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come down to the bottom right there. That makes a lot more sense because I can see that center dot. So I know that it's centered on that pin. I think that's what I've done in the past. It didn't select it, so let me tap that white dot for one entity selected. And then I'm going to come over here, and on this hole, I'm going to see if I can pick the bottom one. Can I do that? Right there, that bottom one. Check mark to accept. That looks way better. You see how that's centered and the pins are centered in the holes. So this is something you do want to be pretty precise with, because if you have too many of these that are off, your the right angles aren't going to work on your chassis. Okay, so let me go back to the isometric view. Let's see what we got. You can see that this is what I'm talking about. So it's a little bit off here. Let's see if it will work by doing a fastener mate again with this hole right here onto this pin. It looks like because we have a little bit off in a few constraints, it looks like our right angles are a little off as well. Let's see if it'll work. Okay, I'm going to go back to the fastener mate, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do that again where I go to the bottom of that pin, find that center hole right there. Perfect. It didn't select it, so tap the white dot. Now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do this hole. I want to use the bottom one so they're flush together. and see how it moves over. Let's see what happens when I do this. I'm going to do check mark to accept. Okay, so what happened here is we have a bunch of fastener mates with error codes, and that means that our dimensions are slightly off. It looks like it pulled it away a little bit too, quite a bit. Do I have the wrong size beam in there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No. So when you look at this, you can see that there are several things off. It looks like that one side is a little longer than the other side. This is actually a lot harder in CAD, especially on an iPad. It's actually easier on the computer to adjust all this. So if you watch the computer videos, this was done very easily. I am not going to worry about it being perfect, and I'm going to continue on and add the gears and the wheels. However, you can see there are some adjustments that need to be made along the way. If you would like to go back and make these adjustments, feel free, but it's not a requirement to learn how to CAD. Just know that it's not going to represent your robot perfectly. But there's a couple things you could do. You could add a longer beam, like a 2x12 across to make the A-shaped chassis. I can move that left side beam over here. This whole beam could be, it looks like it could be moved down a little bit, but honestly, it's not worth all of the effort for this lesson, and you're just a beginner CADer, so I think we're doing fine. So if it really bugs you, you can try and fix it and get this beam, maybe replace it with a 2x12. It'll overhang a little bit on the left, but I'm just going to move forward, and we are going to go ahead and start adding some gears to our axles. I think we're going to call this the end of lesson 3 for the iPad, and in lesson 4, we will add the gears and the wheels to complete our chassis. Thanks for watching.